Tenielle is our next contributor. So Daryl kind of touched on some of those Chinese or international influences on the topic that we are discussing. And that's Tenielle's line of expertise. So Tenielle, do you want to introduce yourself quickly again, just for those who joined later, and then we can get into the questions.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Tenielle Ellis. I'm originally from Honolulu, Hawaii. I just graduated with a dual master's degree. I did 1 year at Columbia University in New York, studying international relations, and I am currently in Berlin, Germany. I did my second year here in public policy. I've traveled a lot around West Africa, Senegal, Gambia, Ghana, as well as I lived in China for 3 years. So I kind of bridged my experiences living in those countries, studying in those countries, and specialize in China-Africa relations, specifically in sustainable investment ethics and how that affects local management. And we will discuss everything. I think the discussion that we just had was very important, and I will go into depth into more of foreign investment, how the Chinese play a role in this, yeah, later on. So yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. I think just to on the flyer it says Sino-Africa Relations. Can you just quickly define what that means, just so we're all on the same page?
Yes, so basically, I'm specializing more in China-Africa relations, Sino-Africa relations. Basically, China's relations or Asian relations into the African continent. Various countries have different governments, whether that's democracies, republics, Islamic republics. So the relations differ. And this could mean relations economically, politically, socially. So we'll get into all of those various facets when we talk about China's role. Yeah.
Okay. So the first question that I had was, in your view or from your experience, what role does these China-Africa relationships have on things like galamsey, but also kind of other environmental crises in Ghana or in the on the continent in general?
Yes, thank you for this question. So first, I want to set the precedent of Sino-Africa relations and really where this stemmed from the trade relations, which was in the late 1950s. And it progressed to 2013, where the Chinese President Xi Jinping executed this strategic global initiative called the One Road, One Belt Initiative, or the BRI. I'm going to be referring to this abbreviation a lot throughout our discussion, so please keep that in note, BRI. And basically, this initiative is not only China doesn't only want to help foster economic growth, targeting lower income countries, but they also want to build railroads that connects a whole bunch of countries around the continent, as well as maritime trade and routes. So a lot of these initiatives, what comes with this is Chinese investments into African infrastructures. And you see a lot of that happening in various countries, not only in Africa, but in the Middle East, in other parts of Southern Asia. And so when it comes to illegal mining or things like galamsey, you can also see a lot of small scale mining operations happening or linking to galamsey activities. And a lot of times, because these activities lack legal frameworks or structural frameworks, a lot of Chinese businesses will exploit these gaps and they will operate without taking accountability for in the environmental impacts or how that affects the local people on the ground. So we're really looking at weak regulatory frameworks that is, yes, as Daryl brought out, is from the government that needs to be worked on. Because if the government isn't even establishing stronger regulatory frameworks around environmental concern, then how do you expect foreign powers to come in and respect that as well? However, there is a lot of good potential in this as well, where China can bring forth a lot of resources with their advanced technology and their investments. However, they have decided not to utilize their skill set to help Ghana or various African countries to help them in the long term, and that's with the economy and everything. So we will get into more of that throughout our conversation.
So in your view, what are the long-term social and economic implications of China's growing influence in Africa and Ghana?
It is very unfortunate because there is so much potential for China to be used as an actor or a partner in this sense with a lot of African countries to help foster their economic growth in the long term. But unfortunately, they took the latter, and it is more of a lender-borrower situation where the relationship between China and a lot of African countries are not equal. It's not mutually beneficial. It's more of a you have something or I have something that you need. And so these are the conditionalities, these are the clauses. If you are not abiding by these conditionalities, then this is what we are going to impose, which could be like a lot of different factories being built there. Or I'm going to deploy my team of Chinese construction workers instead of looking at who's on the ground and using the local skill set. So in the long term, this could actually, this already has very negative and drastic effects to many African countries, one of them being Kenya, which is the #1 leading country in Africa, which is plummeted in debt to China. And Ghana, from what I last checked from last year in October, owes about $2 billion to China. So with all that being said, we can already see the statistics and the numbers. And you can already see that the long-term impacts of China's investments into these infrastructures do not necessarily help them in the long run. In the short run, when you're giving out $1 million loan for 5% interest, this is just an example, then this could be a very attractive deal. But when you're not looking at the clauses or the conditionalities that they've imposed, when there's no legal frameworks to these contracts, then this is when a lot of the local governments are not looking at any of these conditionalities. And a lot of times the leaders themselves also benefit from these negotiations because they get a really big percentage and share of what the Chinese is offering them. So they're not looking at their national interests and they're not looking at long-term economic yields, which is very important when we're talking about negotiating with the Chinese. There's also a lot of social implications. So like I was just saying, Chinese companies prioritize importing their labor, and this sidelines a lot of local workers. And this can fuel a lot of tensions between Chinese workers and local workers. And also, when we talk about the media, a lot of the media tends to overlook a lot of these issues and problems of China's true and real impact into Africa. They tend to glorify how China is donating all of this money or helping to foster the economic growth of these African countries, but the media is not really publicizing and not being transparent as to what goes on in these negotiation tables, what happens, what are the discussions, what are the dialogues, what is exactly being agreed on. You don't see a lot of those in the media, and China does that on purpose to kind of further their propaganda that they're the ones that are helping Africa get out of poverty and helping them with their infrastructure development and helping them with their education spheres. So these issues that I'm talking about are not really highlighted in the media.
Woo! I'm loving how all everybody's points is like linking together. So Adam, coming to you about the media. That is fab. I can see some brewing questions already. So we're going to quickly go over the last couple questions.
Sure.
I'm going to do 2 questions
Yeah.
from the audience, and then we'll move on to Adam, and then we'll do the rest of the questions after.
Sure.
So my question is, how can African countries, how do you think they can ensure fair and sustainable partnerships in these relations?
Yes. So the heart of this is local governments adopting, so to say, proactive strategies in negotiations, not so much I'm going to go to the negotiation table because I need $1 billion to build my mining factory, and I'm just going to deal with the consequences later. No, you need to hire skilled laborers, you need to hire consultants, hire negotiators, bring the African Union to the table, bring there are so many resources that the government can use to help them prepare for negotiating when it comes to this. And this is extremely important. It sets the precedent for how the Chinese will, quote unquote, respect uh, the local governments and what they want. So for instance, like building skilled teams of negotiators to advocate for fairer terms in contract with the Chinese. And this is a really key point that a lot of people in the audience were saying. Daryl touched up upon this, but transparency, accountability, and I'm going to add one more thing, accuracy. The accuracy of the knowledge that is being broadcasted. So, like I was saying before, publicizing agreements to ensure transparency, establishing like monitoring bodies to oversee project implementation of Chinese businesses to make sure that there's fairer management going on and not just the Chinese coming in and taking over and restricting local management. We can also focus on sustainability, looking at like impact assessments. So there's so many things that are missing here when it comes to China being involved in investing in a lot of African infrastructures. And another thing I wanted to bring out is I believe that throughout my research that a lot of local governments need to start looking at diversifying their partnerships when it comes to the global market. China is Africa's largest trading partner. And when you look at that, that makes the market very niche and very exclusive. And this emphasizes or shows a relationship that can be extremely toxic because it starts to become dependency debt, where a lot of African countries are dependent on China in order to thrive, in order to establish their infrastructures. So this is very important for China to also, for Africa to also look at different partners. However, this all also does center back and come back to them fostering their own their local workers, like investing more in education and vocational training, so that you can keep skilled workers in places like Ghana, throughout the continent, instead of them having to leave to find other jobs because there's better pay, there's better incentives. Like this is what the government needs to be looking at to keep skilled workers in their country. And this would thus, like in the long term, really help the growth trajectory of the economy, the local economy. So yes, I think I touched on a lot of things with the fourth question as well.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, I'll ask it anyway. So, what
Sure.
role should African governments play in regulating Chinese businesses? Now that I asked you that question, that sounds more like a legal thing, but
Yeah.
I'll ask it
Yeah.
anyway. What role should African governments play in regulating Chinese business to protect the environment and the local economies and
They
communities?
have, yes, thank you, Andrea. They have a very, very crucial role. They need to enforce better policies, foreign policies, when it comes to global trade in general. China, we are looking at China because it is their number one partner. But when you look at it in general, they lack a lot of legal frameworks, structured legal frameworks when it comes to what they bring to the negotiation table, and what are they asking for. So there needs to be a lot of development with stricter environmental regulations, if I'm going to touch upon that as well, tailored to sectors where Chinese businesses operate, like Galamsey, and to also penalize non-compliant companies. And when I talk about these penalties, that can be utilized in different ways because there's like in Islamic republics versus democracies, or different governments, they can use that in their own way. You can also mandate local hiring quotas and training programs in Chinese operated businesses. And this is from the grassroots, of using what you already have to inform and educate the Chinese that are coming in, and to also support local suppliers and businesses. So there's so many things that need to be done, but I think the number one crucial conclusion to all of this is that local governments need to be more prepared when they come to the negotiation table with China. China knows exactly what they're doing with their negotiations with Africa. And I saw a question here that I'm going to talk about now, which is why would China even invest in this, if there's not a lot of if the relationship or is not as mutually beneficial. And this is because China doesn't invest into African infrastructures for money. This is not a business deal for them. This is power for them, control. This is a part of modern day colonialism, neo-colonialism that we see happening right now. If they wanted to do business deals, they would do it with the US, they would do it with the EU, but they choose to target and exploit a lot of African infrastructures and governments because they know there's a gap there. They know that there's a need that needs to be filled, and they're the ones that are going to try to fulfill it. But that in long term exacerbates a lot of the economic downfall of these local African governments. So I think I said.
Woo! I'm loving this, and it's getting heated in the chat.
I love it. I love it. Yes.
Loving it.
I mean, I don't love it. This is not
event on its own.
Yes.
I'm gonna come back to a lot of those comments in a bit. So we're gonna do Buntry, and then we're gonna do Ira, and then we're gonna move on to Edem, just to kind of get all the points out there, and then we can really begin to hit some of these things. So Buntry.
Good evening again. Thank you also for your contributions. I'll try to keep my question brief this time, Madam Ellis. To say, you mentioned about China, here in Ghana since the 50s. It actually goes way, way back. There's a lot of proof of China in Nigeria, the Edo State area, Cameroon, and so forth. But let's just focus on 20th century and this century. I wanted to ask, how important is it to you? Do you feel that there'd be a sort of like an ideological analysis of China in Africa in the 50s, under those, that era of independence leaders, as compared to China today with our neo-colonial, neoliberalism? How important do you think it is that there be, you could call it a separate, but just an ideological analysis to see, if any, what the differences in motivation and political orientation is between the two eras, the two generations of Maoist Chinese and Jinping Chinese, so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I think you answered your own question. That was a great question into your explanation. You summed it up really well. Yes, with the Maoist era, and excuse me, from what I said, the late 1950s, I just meant that was when they conducted majority of global trade within various African countries. I wasn't just touching upon Ghana. But yes, the relationship goes back much, much further. And I would definitely say there needs to be an analysis. I don't know why there hasn't been. If you look at a lot of economist reports, they do mention analysis is like these, but where they differ in a lot of economists' perspective is in the Maoist era versus now with the Xi Jinping era, it's extremely different. There's a lot of similarities with you can say like communism in the Maoist era, and now there's, I would say, modern day communism with China. And you can see how back then China was still trying to establish themselves as a global power. So their motives were much different when it came to collaborating. They did not want to open up their networks to the globe, if I'm just going to be frank. Their China in Chinese, 中国 literally translates to the middle country, like the country that's in the center of the world. So that's how they viewed themselves. And I feel like there would be actually like way more differences in that comparative analysis from then and now than similarities. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I think that is necessary.
Thank you. Ira, you had a question?
Okay, right. I was saying that I always find it problematic when we posit Africans as victims and we sort of like have external people coming in with solutions. And sometimes actually I think a lot of the reports that come out about from the, I don't know, world, whatever, and this person, that person, it's not actually accurate, because when you talk to the locals, it's a completely different kind of stuff going on the ground level, to what we're reading about, to what we're hearing about. And I honestly think that the solutions have to come from the Africans who live there, who've grown up there, who know the culture and the language, and we kind of like work hand in hand to support if need be. And the other thing I was saying as well was like, the other problem that I have is that I think the Chinese are just looking out for their own interests. And quite frankly, I think that Western governments have done worse than what the Chinese have done. And I think that it is up to the Africans to come up with a plan that works for them when they're doing, when they're making these deals with external governments and so on and so forth. And they choose, in my opinion, like the lady has just said, they choose to do something else. They choose to do what benefits them all across the board, as we consistently see with everything they're doing. It's about self, 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 self. So that's the only point I wanted to make. And then I was having a discussion in the chat, because I was saying, well, what's happened to Ghana and other African countries when we've got countries like Malaysia who also got their independence? Because I find Ghanaians are very defensive and they come up with excuses like, oh, we're a new country and this, that, and the other. I don't buy it. Again, it's a victim thing. And I think that if you want to do something, you want to make it work, you will find a way. If you don't want to, you will remain a victim. And I'm very hardcore about it. And I'm really sorry. I hope I don't offend anyone, but that's just my opinion. And that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, you don't have to apologize. Pretty much everything you're saying is the whole reason why we're having this conversation, is the whole reason why I put together the research center, and I'm going to talk all about all of that in a bit, but that's pretty much the whole thing, right? I don't blame China for looking out for their own interests, right? That's what they should do. Our problem is that we don't do that. And it's funny, there was a discussion that's happening in London at the moment, because every year they put out this song, the Do They Know It's Christmas Time at All, that song. And FuseODG sort of did this post, kind of gone viral, talking about how the BBC always positions Africa as a poor country, blah, 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 blah. And it's a discussion that we've been having for as long as I can remember. And my position is that I'm tired of the discussion. I just don't care. Because why are we so concerned about how the BBC is portraying Africa? We're saying, the BBC wants to portray Africa as broke and poor and all that kind of stuff. That's their platform. Do I agree? Of course not. But the reality is, the relationships that our leaders have with these Western leaders is one of begging and poverty, right? So even when they went to COP29, the president was talking about, these are all the things that we've put in place, but we need more money because we're a third world country. Like, that's basically how they are positioning themselves, and we allow these people to represent us in this way. And for me, I'm very much like, how can we, as in like actual people who are invested in this, work with locals to find those solutions? But I'm going to touch on all of that in a bit, because that's kind of what we're doing as a centre, and the whole point of the initiative, because actually we can't keep expecting other people to solve these problems. Okay, Kukwa, do you want to ask your question?
Excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation, Daryl and Tenielle and Adam. I'm really excited about your presentation. And Andrea, thank you for this opportunity. So my question is more of a, I guess, a comment and a question. My question would be just to understand more of what can be done. And it's stemming from the fact that I feel these conversations can get very quickly anti-Black. Again, I'm not pointing fingers. This is coming from my almost 2 decades, working in Ghana. I literally just moved out of Ghana recently. My job has been with persons that are indigent. And so I don't think that the most economically challenged Ghanaians point fingers for where they are, at least from my interaction with those persons. And even looking at my grandparents that are an example, I think that the reason why I'm asking what can be done is because I'm really concerned when I look at the statistics for the percentages African countries get from whatever they produce. So thank you so much, Daryl, for bringing up the issue of the cocoa farming, for example, and the issue currently with the minerals leaking. I think today I found out the percentage was like 6% that Ghana gets from cocoa. I don't know what we get from gold, but I feel that there are these structural issues that define what is going on. If we are using 90% of our money to service, not even to pay, but to service debt that we have, what room is there for African countries then to be able to get any money to develop? And I'm also bringing this up to say that within that sphere, this whole idea, Nelson Mandela said that poverty is artificial, like apartheid, and slavery and all the other things. The artificial, creations. It doesn't make sense that there's so much wealth and yet people are impoverished. And when you trace back, it's literally going to the situation where African countries have minimal proportions in what they are creating. So it's why it brings me back to what can be done. Again, I really love the discussions on the solutions that are coming from Africans. And so that's why I'm very happy that Daryl and Tenielle, spoke about that. And I think Edem will as well. So thank you so much for taking my perspective and just having this. This is all so fabulous.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Very encouraging.